A spring night in Columbus, Ohio, a 27-year-old medical student walks into a packed bar filled with music and laughter. Security cameras record him entering. Friends see him inside, they talk, they laugh. The night moves forward like any other. But when the night ends, Brian Shaffer is gone. No camera clearly shows him leaving. No witness confirms walking out beside him. No trail leads investigators to a definitive answer. He simply vanished from one of the busiest entertainment districts in the city, surrounded by people, covered by surveillance, and yet completely unaccounted for. Law enforcement would spend years reviewing every piece of available evidence. His family would spend years waiting for a phone call that never came. This is the documented story of one of America's most baffling disappearances. A case built on confirmed facts, unanswered questions, and a single haunting detail that has never been fully explained. Before that night, Brian Shaffer had everything ahead of him. He was a second-year medical student at The Ohio State University, known by those around him as intelligent, warm, and genuinely outgoing. His future looked bright, filled with purpose and possibility. But life had grown heavier in the weeks before that spring evening. His mother, Renee Shaffer, had passed away from cancer not long before, leaving Brian and his family carrying a grief that no one fully understood from the outside. Still, Brian kept moving forward. He talked openly about graduating, about traveling, about the medical career he had worked so hard to build. Friends and family saw someone processing loss, but still looking ahead. He had plans. He had people who loved him. He had a future he was actively building. No one who knew Brian Shaffer could have imagined that the weekend ahead would be the last time any of them would ever see him. That evening began quietly enough. Brian Shaffer had dinner with his father before heading out to meet friends for a night in Columbus. The group moved through several spots across the city before eventually arriving at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, located inside the South Campus Gateway Complex, a popular entertainment destination near Ohio State University. Security cameras recorded Brian entering the bar. Inside, the atmosphere was exactly what you would expect on a Friday night. Loud music, packed crowds, and the kind of energy that fills a college district bar at its busiest. Those who saw Brian that night described him as relaxed and in good spirit. Nothing about his behavior raised concern. Surveillance footage later captured him near the entrance, speaking with two women. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary night out, but that footage would later take on enormous significance. Those images of Brian standing near the entrance, talking and laughing, would become one of the final confirmed recordings of him alive. As the night wound down, Brian's friends made their way out of the Ugly Tuna Saloona, fully expecting him to follow close behind. He never appeared. Calls to his phone went completely unanswered. His friends assumed he had simply headed home on his own. Nothing unusual about that. But when Brian failed to contact anyone the following day, that assumption quickly turned into alarm. His father, Randy Shaffer, reported him missing to authorities. Detectives immediately pulled surveillance footage from the bar and the surrounding Gateway complex. The footage confirmed Brian entering the bar. However, investigators could not find any definitive footage clearly showing him walking out. Every exit point was reviewed, every timestamp was examined, yet the recordings offered no conclusive answer. What had started as a routine missing person report had transformed into something far more perplexing, a documented mystery that investigators could not easily explain away. By the morning of April 1, 2006, investigators faced a question that seemed almost impossible to answer. Brian Shaffer had walked into one of the busiest entertainment districts in Columbus, Ohio, on a crowded Friday night. Hundreds of people had been present, cameras had been recording, yet no footage clearly showed him walking out. Detectives began the painstaking process of reviewing every available recording, interviewing every available witness, and tracing every possible movement Brian may have made inside that building. What they found only deepened the confusion. The more carefully investigators examined the evidence, the more questions emerged. A straightforward missing person report had transformed into something far more complex. There were no easy answers, no obvious explanations, and no clear trail leading anywhere. The investigation was only beginning, and the picture forming in front of law enforcement was one that would challenge them for years to come. Investigators reviewed every available camera positioned across the South Campus Gateway complex. Footage confirmed Brian entering the Ugly Tuna Saloona after 1:15 in the morning, and later showed him speaking with two women near the bar entrance. Detectives analyzed the recordings carefully, frame by frame, searching for any clear image of him walking out. Despite that thorough analysis, police could not conclusively place Brian leaving through the main entrance at any point during the night. What made the investigation even more complicated was a critical gap in coverage. Not every service exit or back-of-house route inside the complex was monitored by cameras. This meant investigators could not rule out every possible path Brian may have taken after his final confirmed appearance on footage. The surveillance system, which should have provided clear answers, instead deepened the mystery. The cameras had captured him arriving. They had captured him talking. But what happened next remained completely unresolved. With Brian officially missing, law enforcement launched an extensive search across Columbus. Officers combed through parking garages, rooftops, wooded areas, construction sites, and nearby waterways, hoping to find any trace of him. Volunteers joined his family, distributing flyers throughout the city and surrounding neighborhoods. Investigators worked methodically through every possible lead. Friends, co-workers, bar staff, and patrons were all interviewed. Detectives examined phone records and monitored financial activity closely, looking for any sign of movement after that night. What they found was a silence that only deepened the mystery. There was no verified evidence that Brian accessed his bank accounts, used his credit cards, or made contact through his mobile phone after the night he disappeared. Not a single transaction, not a single call. Every lead investigators pursued eventually reached a dead end. Every promising detail dissolved into more unanswered questions. The search had been thorough, determined, and exhaustive, yet Brian Shaffer remained nowhere to be found. With no confirmed answers, investigators and researchers began examining the most credible explanations for what happened to Brian Shaffer that night. The first theory suggests Brian exited through an area not covered by surveillance cameras. Given that not every service corridor or back route inside the Gateway complex was monitored, this remains a genuinely plausible explanation that investigators have never been able to rule out. The second theory raises the possibility of foul play occurring after Brian left the building. While this was examined seriously, no suspect was ever identified, and no physical evidence connected any individual to his disappearance. The third theory proposed that Brian voluntarily walked away from his life. However, investigators found no financial activity, no documented communication, and no verified evidence supporting this conclusion. His family rejected this theory entirely. What makes this case so deeply unsettling is that none of these theories has ever been officially confirmed. Investigators were left without a definitive answer, and that uncertainty has never changed. Years passed without resolution, yet the case never truly went cold. The Columbus Division of Police continued treating Brian Shaffer's disappearance as an active investigation, refusing to archive it alongside forgotten files. Periodically, renewed media attention brought the story back into public consciousness, generating fresh tips from viewers and readers who believed they had seen something significant. Across America, advances in forensic science were solving cases that had sat untouched for decades. DNA technology, digital forensics, and facial recognition tools were giving investigators powerful new resources. Yet despite these developments, Brian's disappearance remained officially open and unresolved. His family never stopped hoping. Those who loved him continued speaking publicly, keeping his name alive in conversations that mattered. Investigators consistently encouraged anyone holding credible information to come forward, no matter how much time had passed. The message from law enforcement remained clear and unchanged. This case was not forgotten. Brian Shaffer was not forgotten. Someone, somewhere, may still hold the answer. For investigators, the evidence had been collected with painstaking care. Witnesses had been interviewed multiple times. Surveillance footage had been reviewed countless hours across countless sessions. Every available lead had been pursued with full resources. And yet, after all of that work, the central question remained completely unanswered. What happened to Brian Shaffer after he walked into the Ugly Tuna Saloona on the night of March 31st, 2006? Nearly 2 decades later, no one knows. That is not a failure of effort. Investigators, family members, and volunteers gave everything they had to finding the truth. The case endures not because of what was found during the investigation, but because of what was never explained despite it. Brian entered a crowded bar in one of Columbus's busiest entertainment districts. People saw him, cameras recorded him, and then, without any confirmed explanation, he was simply gone. That reality is what carries this case forward into the present day. Family members refused to give up hope, keeping Brian's memory alive through every possible channel. Friends continued speaking publicly, ensuring his name remained part of the conversation. Detectives revisited the evidence as new technology emerged, hoping fresh tools might reveal what earlier analysis had missed. Missing person posters remained displayed across Ohio for years. True crime researchers examined the timeline repeatedly, searching for any overlooked detail. Media outlets returned to the story with each passing anniversary, introducing it to entirely new audiences. Community members who had never met Brian still carried awareness of his case. Yet every review, every re-examination, every new perspective arrived at the same impossible fact. Brian Shaffer was seen entering the Ugly Tuna Saloona on the night of March 31st, 2006. No confirmed footage showed him leaving. That single detail, documented and verified by investigators, continues to define the entire investigation and the unanswered question that surrounds it. Investigators examining the case identified 4 primary theories, none of which has ever been officially confirmed. The first acknowledges that cameras did not cover every exit within the Gateway complex, leaving open the genuine possibility that Brian walked out through an unmonitored route without ever being recorded. The second theory involves foul play occurring after he left the building. Detectives examined this thoroughly, reviewing potential suspects and circumstances, but no individual was ever formally identified or charged. The third theory proposed a voluntary disappearance, suggesting Brian may have chosen to walk away from his life entirely. However, investigators found no verified financial activity, no documented communication, and no credible evidence supporting this conclusion. His family rejected it completely. The fourth and most persistently discussed element remains the surveillance footage itself. Despite extensive analysis, no official explanation has ever been confirmed for how Brian Shaffer seemingly vanished from a building filled with people and active cameras that night. Brian Shaffer's disappearance represents one of the most puzzling missing person investigations in modern American history. Nearly 2 decades have passed, and the central question remains completely unanswered. What happened to a young, promising medical student inside a crowded bar on a busy Friday night in Columbus, Ohio? The case has been featured in documentaries, podcasts, books, and investigative journalism across the country. Each retelling brings renewed public attention And with that attention comes the possibility of new information surfacing from someone who has stayed silent for years. Law enforcement continues encouraging anyone with credible information to come forward. Investigators have never officially closed the case. Advances in forensic technology have transformed cold case investigations across America. Techniques unavailable in 2006 are now standard tools for detectives. For Brian's family and the investigators who have worked this case, those advances represent something deeply important. They represent renewed hope that a future breakthrough may finally provide the answers that have remained hidden for so long. On March 31, 2006, Brian Shaffer entered a crowded bar with friends in Columbus, Ohio. Security cameras recorded him walking inside. Witnesses spoke with him. He laughed, moved through the crowd, and existed in that space as clearly as anyone else that night. Then, without explanation, he was gone. No confirmed evidence has ever established what happened after those final, recorded moments. No one has been charged in connection with his disappearance. No official explanation has ever been announced by investigators or authorities. For nearly 2 decades, his family has waited. Detectives have continued working. Researchers have reviewed the same footage and the same timeline, searching for something that has not yet surfaced. The disappearance of Brian Shaffer remains one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. Somewhere, an answer exists, a witness who has not spoken, a detail that has not been connected, a discovery that has not yet come. Until that moment arrives, the case remains open. Every unsolved disappearance leaves behind families waiting for answers and investigators determined to find the truth. Brian Shaffer's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest mysteries hide in plain sight, not in remote locations or hidden corners of the world, but in crowded rooms full of witnesses and cameras. A young man with a future full of promise simply vanished, and nearly 2 decades later, the question of what truly happened that night in Columbus, Ohio, remains unanswered. If you have thoughts on this case, please share them respectfully in the comments below. If this documentary resonated with you, consider liking this video, subscribing to Mysterious Crime, and sharing it with others who care about these stories. Your support allows us to continue producing well-researched investigations that honor victims and pursue the facts with care and integrity. Every mystery has a story, and every victim deserves to be remembered with truth and respect.